Hello teacher, this is my video for the short story A Jury of Her Peers by Susan Gaspell, and I'm going to start with the summary. The story begins with Martha Hell and her hasty departure from her farm in Dickinson County. Miss Hell doesn't like to leave her yard half done in disarray, but she has been called to accompany a group of her neighbors who were waiting outside to go to the crime scene, which was at the family residence of the Wright. The group stopped by their home to pick up her husband, Lewis Hell, but the sheriff Henry Peters asked Martha to also accompany his wife because was freaking out and wanting another woman as a company of her. The country attorney George Henderson was also included in the group. The Wright resident looked lonely. That's one of the reasons Miss Hall never visited Minnie, whom she knew as a child as Minnie Foster. The Hell are the closest neighbors to the Wright, and for that reason they were summoned by officers for questioning. Furthermore, Mr. Hell was the first to learn of John Wright's unnatural death. The group stood in the Wright's kitchen, and Mr. Peter asked Lewis Hell to describe what he witnessed on the farm the day before. And when the officers were scanning the kitchen and the items there for any clues as to the motive for the murder, they remarked, with some distaste on Minnie's unseemly way of taking care of her home. There were broken fruit jars and unwashed silverware, dirty kitchen area, and many other things. They then left the kitchen in the custody of their wives and went up the stairs. Mr. Hell begins by recounting that he had come to the Wright house the morning before to ask if he wanted to install a telephone in his house. Upon arrival, he found Minnie Wright sitting in her rocking chair in the kitchen. She seemed very unconscious and lost, and when Mr. Hell was asked about her husband, she replied that John was home, but that Mr. Hell couldn't talk to him because he was dead. When Lewis asked how it happened, she explained that he died from a rope around his neck. Minnie Wright was arrested as the prime suspect. Then the ladies look at everything in the kitchen area, trying to find the cause of the act of murder. Finally, they come across the broken jar, the unfinished coat, and the madly sealed block, Minnie's rag dresses, and the dead canary, whose body she kept in a beautiful decorated box. The women were able to understand Minnie's situation very well and fully understood the reason for her behavior, and they agreed that it was hell for her to live with a person who wasn't identical to her. Also, upon finding the bird's broken cage, they assumed that Minnie was sad about her marriage, her lack of social life, her childless slaughter of her bird, and all this motivated her to kill her oppressor, so to speak, who had kept her oppressed for so long. Therefore, the ladies unanimously decided not to tell their husbands about the discovery of the missing links and successfully hide the bird and the quilt. And at the end, for the group, it was justice delivered in the right way. Now I'm going to tell you the analysis I did for this short story. I divided in characters, theme, symbols, rise in action, climax, fall in action, and conflicts. The first one, Minnie Wright, the accused on suspicion of murder. She was a quiet woman who, in her single life, dressed well and lived well. After her marriage, she had to adopt a life that belonged to her husband and not hers at all. The following is John Wright, her husband. He was a respectful man of the law who had a good reputation in society, but to his wife, Minnie, it was a terror. He was cold, cruel, and intimidating with his wife. Miss Martha Hell is Farmer Hell's wife. From the opening scene, it's evident that she is extremely particular about the art of cleaning. Also, Miss Peters is the sheriff's wife. She was extremely respectful to her husband, and she entrusts herself with the great responsibility of upholding and complying with the law. However, in the end, we also see her doing her best to hide the evidence from her husband to prevent Minnie from suffering the punishment. Also, we have Sheriff Henry Peters, lawyer George Henderson, and the farmer Lewis Hell. These three men represent male chauvinism, who didn't consider the ability of women in anything other than housework and motherhood. Victimization of women. This study shows the cruelty that many women have endured, which was inflicted on them by their own protectors, it means their husbands. Here, Minnie Wright represents those women who suffer some form of domestic violence, whether physical or mental. The other one is gender bias. The men in this short story who played important roles such as law enforcement officers despise the women, in this case their own wives, and thus Minnie Wright. They despised everything they could find as evidence in Minnie's kitchen. They left everything on the hands of their wives, judging them as insignificant things. The canary could represent the unfortunate situation Minnie lived for 20 years. She suffered in silence. She was isolated from the rest of the world like the canary in a cage, locked up without being able to escape. The other one is the quilt. The quilt is another important element that appears in the story, and it could express Minnie's confession. The story suggests that she was an expert in the art of sewing, and the quilt was beautifully stitched by Minnie, but there was only one block that was uneven. Also, like the sewing pattern, all that could represent the tranquility and the physical and mental pain that she lived at the same time. And finally, the rope, the method of murder used to kill John Wright. Minnie wanted her husband to experience the havoc he wreaked on both. She and her poor bird, she drowned her husband, and as he smothered her and the bird. For her, it was justice. In the rising action, the event that sets off the story's dynamics occurs when the women find pieces of evidence that the men consider insignificant or trifles. That means the preserves, the dead songbird, and the frazzled sewing. These things confirm to the women that Miss Wright did indeed kill her husband. The climax. Miss Hale decides to conceal the evidence found in the kitchen to protect Miss Wright, because she sympathizes with her as she had exploded due to the oppression from her husband. In the following action, the women make the connection between the songbird that Miss Wright loved so much, which Mr. Wright killed. As he had killed Miss Wright, he metaphorically killed her with oppression. And the resolution, Miss Hale successfully convinces to Miss Peters to suppress the evidence that only they notice. The men do not pick up on these pieces of evidence. I can find two conflicts. The first one, women versus men. The women in this short story were oppressed by men, their husbands and agents, showing that women were so oppressed by their husband that in one case it caused a murder. Also, men push women aside. The most notable and important example of this is overlooked evidence. And the second one, women versus society. The men in this short story help to emphasize the social expectation of women to be perfect in the order at home and to stay away while the men discuss business, in this case, the murder investigation.